All right, guys, let's start the session for today. And you can continue to redeem your passes in the back end. Let me know if my screen is visible.
Yep, you have Notepad open?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So what we are going to do, we are going to talk about Active Directory. And you already know what Active Directory is. So in an on-premises establishment, you have a Windows Server Active Directory or a directory service. Now, why do we use a directory service? For the authentication and authorization. So most of the corporates, I'm saying all the corporates have a directory service, and they use the directory service for authentication and authorization. That's what they use it for. So what they do, they create users in the directory services. They, they manage the properties of the users. Properties in the sense what department the user belong to, who does the user reports to, what is the specific roles and responsibility of the user, what devices user is registered with, and what are the permissions that the user has been granted if user is part of a group. So this is the information which is part of a directory service, and we use directory service for authentication and authorization to various system and resources. Now, the example of a directory service is Windows Server Active Directory. So Microsoft has created this directory service that you basically deploy on a Windows Server operating system, which is known as Active Directory. And what Active Directory does, similar functionality, you can create users in Active Directory, you can assign them permissions, you can allocate them devices or register their devices, and you can assign them access to various applications and resources which are part of your organization IT infrastructure. For example, printers, servers, applications. That's what you do in Active Directory. Now, Active Directory has much more than this. Active Directory also takes care of other aspects, but from this topic perspective, let's just understand the specifics of Active Directory, that it's a authentication and authorization solution, software or tool. And the example of an of a directory service is Microsoft Windows Active Directory. Now, the server on which you install Active Directory service, they are known as domain controllers. So domain controllers, the servers on which Active Directory services are installed, and these domain controllers are responsible for Active Directory services. How do you install Active Directory service on a server? You provision a Windows Server virtual machine, or let's say on a physical hardware, you deploy a Windows Server operating system. Then you go to Server Manager, and from the Server Manager, you will see one role with the name Active Directory Domain Service. So you will actually deploy that role, and that installs the Active Directory Domain Service for your organization. And then you can create users there. So let's just see how we do this real quick, if you have not already done in the past. So let's log into our respective Azure subscription. This is my subscription. I'll see if I have a virtual machine. I don't have a virtual machine, so I'll quickly create one virtual machine. I had decommissioned all my virtual machines just to save cost. I can give virtual machine, my name is AD Active Directory Domain Service VM. That's the name of my virtual machine. US East, I don't need availability right now. I can use this size or maybe a higher size for a moment. Use the credentials. Let's all of you quickly provision a VM while I'm doing this. Just to save cost, I'm using standard SSD. I'm not adding any additional data disk. Networking, okay. So I don't have a network right now. So what I'll do, I'll just select whatever network Microsoft is suggesting. I'll not select anything from here. All right, I'm just reviewing the information and my server is getting created. All right, the virtual machine is provisioned. Let's quickly connect to this virtual machine. All right, so I've just provisioned this virtual machine, which is hosting a Windows Server 2019 operating system. And you can see the configuration here. It's 2019 operating system. And if you see right now, it says work group is work group. So this server is not joined to a domain, or this server is not a domain controller. Now let's assume that this virtual machine or server is part of an on-premises network. This is your on-premises data center where you have deployed this server. Now you want to deploy, you want to install or promote this server as a domain controller. In Active Directory terminology, we call it promoting a server to a domain controller. So what we can do, we can just click on a Windows arrow and we can type server. I would say we need to be on server manager. So when you type first few letters, you will see server manager. And server manager is one-stop shop to manage the server and its configuration. So you'll go to server manager. You can either click on add roles and feature here in the middle of the screen where you see configure this local server, or you can click on tools. I'm sorry, you can click on manage and you can click on add roles and feature here as well. So let's say we click on add roles and feature. You will see the similar window. If you remember, we followed this option when we actually deployed Internet Information Services or IIS role on a server which was hosting a website. So we'll follow the next option. We'll go to next. All right, so we are on the screen now. What we need to do here, these are all the roles which are available for this server. So we'll select the role Active Directory Domain Service. And there are multiple roles which are related to Active Directory. But for this lab, we'll just create this role, Active Directory Domain Service. When we click on, when we check the box, it shows me this additional pop-up which has some tools by default selected, which says include management tools. These are the tools through which you can manage your Active Directory. So we'll click on add feature. And you see this Active Directory domain service box is checked. Click on next, next, next. And since Windows Server 2019 is the recent version of Windows Server from Microsoft, it also has default integration with Azure Active Directory. So that's the reason it says Azure Active Directory is a single service. So let's just leave it. Let's click on next. And then it shows you the final confirmation. You just need to click on install. Now what this is doing, this is deploying an Active Directory domain service on this server. Once that service is deployed, then you also need to do some additional configuration. So right now it is just installing the role. Then you will promote this server as a domain controller by doing the additional configuration. I hope everyone is with me till here, till this point.
Yep.
Yes.
So, Raghav, when you mentioned Server 2019 was already integrated with Azure Active Directory, is it by default? You don't need to install the AD sync, or?
No, it is not already integrated. It has the capability. It has the capability for for integration. In fact, from the server manager, you can also manage your Azure Active Directory. So Microsoft has enabled that synchronization or that capability. Okay. So this
I wasn't aware of that because I haven't had much experience with Server 19.
Yep.
So that's interesting.
Yep, it has it has the capability. Okay, so it's the configuration is completed. Now we'll close it. Now, once you deploy the role, you also need to do a quick reboot of your server. So we'll do the reboot after we are done with the post deployment configuration. What we have done right now, we have only added the role. Now we need to promote the server as a domain controller. So it says promote this server as a domain controller. When this role is done, when you see this flag, you will see an acceleration sign. You will click here. Now it will ask you to add your domain. So if you already own a domain, let's say you have purchased the domain from GoDaddy or Bluehost or any site, you can add that domain. So there are three options. First, add a domain controller to an existing domain, add a new domain to an existing forest, add a new forest. Now, I don't want to get into the details of how Active Directory works, so forest and domain, but this is what we are going to do. Since we are doing it for the first time, we'll select this option which says add a new domain to an existing forest, right? Now, it says select domain type. So you need to select your domain type, which is, since we are doing it for the first time, you will select free domain. A lot of change has, a lot of capabilities have been added to server 2019 as compared to the previous version. Now you will type your forest name. Forest is like the higher structure. I will say the management plane. Inside forest, you have multiple domains. And then inside domains, you can create multiple child domains. So example, if there is a company which is multinational, they can create one forest. The forest name could be, let's say, the name of the company, ABC Corporation. Then they can create domains specific to the country. So for US, they can create one domain. For UK, they can create one domain. For Asia Pacific, they can create one domain. And inside those domains, they can create additional child domains. So that's how they can manage different aspects. But all of that functions under the same forest, which means all of those domains will be trusting each other, and they will be able, and resources will be able to communicate with each other. So you will type the forest name. Let's say you can type ABC. There it says the domain name. Now you can type your domain name. For example, I own Cloud Experts, so I can type Cloud Experts. If you don't have a domain, what you guys can do, you can just type Contoso. So that's my domain, cloudexpert.com. And what you guys can type, you can type .com. That's the generic domain that Microsoft owns, and we can use this domain to actually do the practice. So that's contoso.com. You can type. Now, once you type this, then you need to provide credentials for the domain administration. So you can click on change and you can provide credentials. I'll use the same credential. Now, these are the domain administrator credentials. Using these credentials, you can actually modify the domain configuration. So I've changed the credentials as well. The moment a server becomes a domain controller, it will not allow login from the same user that you actually used to log into the server before you promoted it as a domain controller. It only requires domain admins to be able to connect to the server. So my user has also become a domain admin now. Then I click on next. Now this is validating the configuration that I've just provided here. It says could not log on to the domain with the specified credential. Supply a valid credential and try again. So you can click on change. Just cancel it for a moment and do it once again. Okay, let's start with the scratch. I would say this has changed in Windows Server 2019 a bit. Let's create a forest first, then we will create a domain. Otherwise, it is asking for the credentials. I'm just clicking on it. It doesn't do anything. Just give it some time. No worries. Let me quickly do a reboot of my machine, which is also needed. So basically, what we were doing wrong is, we were adding a new domain to an existing forest, but since there is no forest that exists, we are doing it for the first time. So we will need to create a forest, and then we will create a domain in that forest.
I think when you create the new forest, that's your default domain, right? And then if you want to add a subdomain later, you can.
Right. I would say because since you're doing it for the first time, that's the reason you need a forest.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me see if my VM is up and running. Things have changed with Windows Server 2019. I would also use 2016 up to, because I always follow a policy of N-1, wherein the most recent version of any product or solution may have certain challenges, certain issues. So in a typical production environment, they follow N-1 policy, which means if 2019 is the latest, they will use 2016. But when 2019 matures, when it has been there, let's say for a year, and based on the feedback, from peers, they will start to upgrade to 2019. That's what most of the organization does. Okay, now we are promoting this server as a domain controller once again. So we'll first add a new forest, and that's where you need to add the root domain name. Okay, I've added the root domain name. Now it says forest function level and domain function level. This is just for the compatibility. So you can select if you have existing domain controllers, then you will need to select the level which they follow. For example, if there's a domain controller which is running 2012 R2, then the forest and domain function level that it would have is either 2008 or 2000. Okay. So we'll select the most recent one, 2016, and it says specify domain controller capabilities. So now this server that you are promoting as a domain controller, by default, DNS services are added. After 2008 R2, Microsoft has integrated DNS with Active Directory. So you can also make this server a DNS server, or you can create a separate domain, DNS server. But it is recommended that domain controller should have DNS capabilities. Global catalog is nothing but the main server. So let's not get into the detail of it. Then it says read-only domain controller. Read-only domain controllers are domain controllers which which you can use for accessing the information, but you cannot make changes to them. It's a security feature. So you typically deploy read-only domain controllers at remote sites where you cannot ensure the security. So since we are doing it for the first time, we'll just keep the options that this is the domain directory service restore mode. If you ever lose this domain, if there is any corruption, then using these credentials, you can restore your directory services. So you can put the credentials. And it says a delegation of this domain control cannot be created because the authoritative parent zone cannot be found. So you can create DNS delegation. You can click next. Then you need to provide the NetBIOS domain name. It is just processing. Okay. Now your domain name will automatically come here, Cloud Experts. You will type your contoso, then click on next. These are the locations where it is going to install the Active Directory database, log files, sysvol folder, which basically gets replicated to other domain controllers when you add more domain controllers. All right, let's click on next. Then it is just giving you some information in terms of what options you have selected. You can validate them once again. Click on next. It is checking for the prerequisites. It will give you an error. First error, that this server does not have a static IP address. Typically, domain controller should have static IP addresses. So these are the warnings that you are receiving. But if so, you can actually proceed further. Prerequisite check completed, but you have some warnings. You can take care of them later, and you can install it. Now you're installing the domain services. Now it is while you're installing the domain services, it will basically talk about the benefits or features of Windows Server 2019 that says that it has a default security name, allow cryptographic algorithm. It is just telling you, some of the capabilities. This will take a couple of minutes. What it is doing, it is promoting the server as a domain controller. It is also adding DNS capabilities to this server, and this will also become a global catalog server. which basically means that the other domain controllers will reference to the server whenever they need some information. So let this installation complete.
Hi Raghu.
Yes.
Sorry, I got dropped for a while in between. So I connected back and I rebooted my VM as well. So now should I add that role again, or should I go to that exclamation mark and promote this server to domain controller directly?
Yeah. Promote this server to domain controller.
Okay. Okay. Then the same setting, right, as we tried before?
No, you need to start at a new forest.
With a new forest. Okay, add a new forest.
Add, yeah. All right.
And
So once,
okay,
just
root
give me 1
domain
minute.
name.
So
Yeah,
once
yeah,
a root domain name is contoso.com.
yeah.
Okay. So my domain controller is restarted. So after the configuration is complete, it has to restart the VM so that it promotes it as a domain controller and configures some of the settings. Now, since my server has become a domain controller, the first thing that I need to do on Azure, I mean, say if this would have been an on-premises VM, then I would have just gone into its TCP IP properties and I've made its IP address static, instead of getting it from DHCP. Now, since this is an Azure VM, I can perform the same activity here. I'll just go to its network adapter. I'll go to IP configurations. And I will make the assignment from dynamic to static so that my server will never lose its IP address. And this is needed for other applications or servers who will reach out to this domain controller for the DNS resolution.
Raghu, the DSRM password, I can give the same password, right? Which I used to log into the VM.
Yep. No, that's the restore password. But you can give the same password. You can keep the same password. That's okay.
Okay, yeah.
I'm logging in to my VM once again or to my domain controller once again. Now it's configuring the group policy client. It needs to configure a couple of settings now that it has become a domain controller. Also, when you log in, this time you will need to type the domain name and your user. You're logging in from a domain credentials. So what you need to do here, let me show you. So this is how you will log in. On the login screen, you will type it like this. Your domain, for example, my domain is cloud experts / and then your username, whatever user you were using, and then the password. That's how you will log in now.
Raghu, in the DNS options, it's giving me like a delegation for this DNS server cannot be created because the authority.
You just go to next. That's okay. Just
Okay.
walk.
Okay.
So a domain controllers take time to get ready, and it takes a couple of minutes to deploy everything. And you don't deploy domain controllers every now and then, and you don't receive requests from users related to this. This is one-time activity. When you build your infrastructure in cloud or in on-premises, you basically deploy directory services. You do all the configuration, and then you continue to use it. What you do as a domain controller is basically ensuring that the directory services are healthy, all the domain controllers are replicating with one another, all the domain controllers have same set of information, that we have a couple of FSMO roles. You need to ensure that those FSMO roles are also healthy, and the domain controller which is holding those FSMO roles are available all the time, because these roles have some significance. So these are the typical tasks of a domain administrator or a Windows server, or Active Directory administrator, which they perform on day-to-day basis. Now, when it comes to Azure, in Azure, you do not use Active Directory domain services to its fullest capacity, because some of the options are not available. Uh, in Azure, what you primarily do, in Azure, we use Azure Active Directory. So this Active Directory that we have just deployed, as soon as this VM is ready, I'll show you how it looks like. Then we will go to Azure Active Directory, and then you will be able to compare that how Azure Active Directory is different than a typical Windows Server Active Directory, which is installed in an on-premises server. So that's the entire goal of doing this exercise, so that you are able to differentiate. Are you able to log into your domain controllers? Mine is
Yep.
ready. Okay. So my domain controller is ready.
So Raghu, did you use a domain username? I mean, Contessa / and then your username?
To log in
Yes.
after it restarted, yes. You will
Okay.
need to use
I
it
missed that.
to log in. You need to type this is how you need to type. So you need to type contoso / and then the username that you were using.
Okay, got it.
Password for this user. Okay. So my domain controller is ready, or my Active Directory server is ready. I'll give you 2 minutes to everyone to be on this page, so that we can talk about rest of the features. Let's quickly be on this page. All right. So while you are doing this, some post configuration tasks that I can talk about is the time zone. You need to make sure that you have the right time zone configured on your domain controller, because your domain controller also acts as a network time server, NTP server, network time protocol server, and all the virtual machines, all the client operating systems. Now imagine in your corporate, you have a domain controller, your laptop has a login ID and password, and your laptop is joined to that domain. So if that domain controller does not have time configuration correct, then there will be a lot of issues. A couple of applications may not function. Authentication may not happen. Group policies will not be enforced. So you will need to make sure that you change the time zone. So what organizations do, if they are multinational, if they operate in multiple geographies, then they always use UTC. If they have operations in one geography only, then they use that geography. So, for example, this virtual machine is created in East US. I'll just go to EST. So I'll put an EST time zone. EST time zone, Eastern time, US and Canada. So I'll select this time basically. And now the time has changed. It's 35 minutes past 1 in the morning, which is the time in Eastern, as per the Eastern time zone. So that's the first thing that I do. Now, since I'm in my domain, controller, if you look at the left dashboard, you see that it has already added 2 services here, which is Active Directory domain services and DNS, because it is holding both the rows. So either you can click here, or you can click on manage. I'm sorry, in tools, And here you will find Active Directory users and computers, Active Directory sites and services, Active Directory modules for Windows PowerShell, Active Directory domain and trust, Active Directory administration center. Now these all capabilities have just been added. So we'll go to Active Directory users and computers. Now this is the place from where you basically add users. So when you join, when you have joined your respective employer, what they have done, they have actually created your credentials here. Now either they create the credentials here or they can have their ERP solutions integrated with Active Directory. So they create credentials in the ERP solutions like SAP HR or something, and those credentials are synchronized here, or they create it here and they get synchronized, in SAP HR or the tools that they use. So this is your domain cloudexperts.com. And if you see, if you click on the domain tree, it shows built-in computers, domain controllers, managed services account, foreign security principles. This is all internal to Active Directory, and users. So when you click on users, to your right, you will see all the default users. These are the default users in your domain. These are domain controllers, and you see one user also, because using this user, you actually created this VM. So this is a built-in account. That's the reason it says it's a built-in account, which was there. It's a built-in account for administrating the computer and domain. So it's also a domain controller. I'm saying domain administrator. If you go to domain controllers, so they have changed some accounts as well. For example, domain controllers, domain guest, enterprise admins. And if you go to members, you will find this user here. So enterprise admins are the administrators who manage the domain enterprise-wide, designated administrators of the enterprise. So your user is there. Now, this is where all the users are created. So example, if I need to create a user, I'll just right click here. I'll click on new, and I can click on user. Now see, when you click on new, this is what you see. So these are the resources that you manage in Active Directory. You can create computers, contacts, group, printers, users, standard folders. So we'll create user. So when you create a user, this is the window that you get. Here you provide all the information for the user. So example, first name, you can put initials, last name, and you can put the user logon name. So logon name could be raghuvi.singh, and it will always have your domain name. So and this, if you want to allocate an email account or email mailbox to this user, it will also be allocated with the same credentials, raghuvi.singh@cloudexperts.com. So cloud experts, and then this is the FQDN for the user, and this is the login name is raghuvi.singh@cloudexperts.com. You can click on next. Then you can create a password for this user. This is typically a temporary password which you can provide to the user, and the user, when they log into the domain for the first time, when they basically authenticate to the domain for the first time, they will be given an option to change the password. We can put a password here. Okay, now it says users must change password as next login. This is the default setting that you will always see. So what you can do, let's not use this setting. We can just, if user cannot change the password, password never expires. You will not have this setting, because if you keep this setting, then then there will be a security violation. Typically, password should be rotated once in 90 days, once in 60 days. It depends on the organization policy. So we'll just keep password never expired just for this lab purpose for COVID. You can also create a user account and then keep it disabled in advance. If you know that 100 employees are going to join next Monday, you don't need to come to office early on Monday and then do all of this activity. You can create the accounts well in advance and you can keep them disabled. So that's how you can do it. So I'll just check the two boxes. User cannot change the password and password never expires. I'll click on next. Let's say this password do not match. Maybe I did some mistake. both the passwords are not matching. Okay, what is happening? Can put some other password. Okay, so it has taken the password and I'll click on finish. So that's how I add a user. Now I'll see this user. If I hit just type, it will actually filter and it will show me all the users like this, all the security group. Now what is the difference between user and security group? Security group is nothing but a folder or a parent folder in which you create users and then you basically assign permissions. So let's say you have 20 people in networking team. Now, instead of giving them access to various services of networking team individually, you can create a security group for networking team, add all those users to the security group and assign permissions at the security group level. That way you can easily manage the directory. So that's the security group. Then we have service accounts. Service accounts are typically the user accounts for which password never expires. And we use service accounts for deployment of databases or for the applications which needs to authenticate to your domain controller. So we have created this user. Similarly, we can create more users. Now let's create a group. So we'll click on new and this time we'll create a group. Now when you create a group, it will ask you first of all group name, then it says group scope. If this is a local group, global group, or universal group, you will create a global group. Then it says what is the type of this group. Is that a security group or distribution group? So we'll select a security group. So let's say I'll create a group, let's say Azure admin. So that's my group name, Azure admin. That's it. You just created a group. Now you can assign members to this group. You can add members to this group. There are two options. Either you click on the group, go to members and add members from here. That's the first option. It will open this pop-up window. You can type the member name, the username in the organization and click on check names. If there's a user, domain controller will be able to identify it. So yes, there's a user with the name Raghuveer RS Singh. So you can add, click OK and the user will be added to this group. That's the first option. So I'll just remove it. I'll just cancel it. I'm not adding it. And the other option is you click on the user and so double click on the user and here a member of, you can click on member of. So you can see this user is member of domain user, right? He's a domain user and here you can click on add. When you click on add, here you can select the group where you want to add this user. So you can select a group which is Azure. You can type first few names and click on check names. And it will show you Azure admin. So now this is the other option. So you've added. Now this user is also part of Azure admin group. You can go back to Azure admin now and you can see this user reflecting there. So if I go to Azure admin and click on members, I'll find Raghuveer Singh here. So these are the methods through which you can add users to a security group. I hope I'm making sense, guys. So far, you're with me.
All good.
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is how we create users and groups. Now what happens as a next step? So as I said, that we are assuming that this is an on-premises deployment and we have this domain controller there. Now, we are part of an organization which has multiple employees, which have thousands of employees. And for those employees, we have created their credentials in the domain controller or in the on-premises Active Directory. Now, your organization is actually migrating some of the workloads and applications to Microsoft Azure. Let's just imagine when they are migrating some workloads means virtual machines, physical servers, and applications which are hosted on those workloads to Azure, you want to provide capabilities to your existing employees or to your users to be able to access those applications from Azure also. And in order to do that, you will need to synchronize your on-premises Active Directory with the directory service that Microsoft Azure uses for the authentication and authorization. And the name of that directory service is Azure Active Directory. Just give me 1 minute. So that's Azure Active Directory. We will talk about Azure Active Directory now. So let's just keep this setting here as it is, and let's move on to the slide deck. Is my screen visible to everyone? You see the Azure Administration and Fundamental Training?
Yes, Raghu.
Okay, let's talk about Azure Active Directory. So Azure Active Directory is cloud-based identity and access management service or authentication and authorization service, which we primarily use to manage users, sign-ins, and access to AD related resources. AD related resources means all the applications, resources, services that you have configured in Azure, they are authenticated using Azure Active Directory. So Azure Active Directory is a cloud-based identity and access management service that helps employees of an organization sign in and access resources, providing services such as, so these are the services that Active Directory provides. It provides authentication, it provides single sign-on, it provides multi-factor authentication, application management, business to business and business to customer, which basically means that if there are people, your organization has a couple of vendors and partners, and those vendors and partners employee also needs access to your on-premises resources and Azure resources. So you don't need to create their accounts in your directory. You can directly use B2B and B2C functionalities of Azure Active Directory, and you can grant them access to your directory so that they can access the applications that you assign them. So these are some of the capabilities that Active Directory provides. Now, this slide also talks about the same. So it basically helps employees sign in, access resources. Now, what are the applications that can use Azure Active Directory? So Microsoft Office 365, M365 in short, we call it, or Office 365, whatever the recent name, the updated name is M365. So all the M365 mailboxes, they are primarily authenticated using Azure Active Directory. Azure portal. Now, if you look at your respective Azure subscription, now this is the ID through which I have logged in. So I have also created this a new account, a new Outlook ID, and then I redeemed an Azure pass here. Now what happens when I created an account with Microsoft and I provided my credentials? I provided my name, my sex, my address, my personal information. I'm saying my social security number, PAN card, Aadhaar card, whatever, and all the information. In fact, added my payment method, and my account is provisioned. Now, when I log into my account, I always provide my login ID and password. How does Microsoft authenticates it? Definitely, there is a repository, there is a directory service in which my credentials, my information is saved. And when I type my password, it basically authenticates to that directory service. So Microsoft also uses a directory service. Now, the directory service that Microsoft uses to authenticate me to Microsoft Azure portal is Azure Active Directory. But when I sign into my email, which is when I go to outlook.com and sign into my mail account, then it is a different directory service. So for Azure, it uses Azure Active Directory, and for other services, it uses a separate directory service. We're focusing on Azure right now. So if I sign out now, look carefully here. I'm signing out from my portal, from my Azure portal, and I'm on this screen. It says login.microsoft.com, and it is talking about I'm saying all the credentials are there. Now I click on this account, then it says, okay, provide the password. The moment I hit the password, you need to actually focus here on the address bar. You will see Active Directory here. So now it is authenticating. It says stay signed in. Yes, stay signed in. And this is authentic. It happens too quick that you don't realize it, but in the back end, the credentials that I've just provided, those credentials were basically sent to Azure Active Directory, who match those credentials with the information that it has in its repository. The credentials were matched, and I'm able to sign it. So that's how I'm able to sign it. And that's exactly what this slide says, that you can actually authenticate Microsoft 365 Azure portal SaaS applications. You can have you can subscribe to a couple of SaaS applications like BMC Remedy or ServiceNow or Oracle applications, and authentication for those applications can be configured with Azure Active Directory. So instead of using the vendor's authentication system, I'm saying when you purchase a product from a vendor, you can also leverage the vendor authentication system to log into that product. But when you have thousands of employees who needs login to that product, you will need to create 1,000 accounts. So instead of creating 1,000 accounts on the vendor portal, you can actually change the authentication method to your directory service. And the moment you change it to your directory service, you don't need to create those 1,000 accounts because those accounts are already exist in your directory service. So most of the organizations, they either use their own directory service for authentication, or they go with federation. Federation means creating a trust between your directory service and your vendors or your customers directory service. I'm saying with an external service. So when that trust is created, then users from both the directory services can authenticate to applications. It could be one-way trust, it could be two-way trust. And so there is a lot to Active Directory. I don't want to get into the details of it, but people typically spend a couple of years working as Windows Server or Active Directory administrators or domain controllers, domain admins, domain administrators, and that's where they learn the tricks of the trade. So you can also authenticate to internal applications which are part of your network. You can authenticate workstation on premises as well, and you can use Azure AD to implement single sign-on. Now, what the single sign-on, I'll talk about later. So Azure Active Directory comes in 4 editions. Since this is a product from Microsoft, there are some editions. One is free edition. So right now, since you're logged into your Azure portal, you're actually using the free edition of Azure Active Directory. How do you verify it? In the search, you can type active, and you see Azure Active Directory as the second option. You can click on it. And here on the screen, if you look at the license at the middle of the window, the license is Azure AD free. So by default, we get a free license, but if we need additional capabilities from Azure AD that it provides to users, we will need to pay and purchase additional licenses. Right now, we are using free license. So what are the other licenses? We have Office 365 apps. If you subscribe to M365, then you will get this license by default. And then we have Premium P1 and Premium P2. Premium P2 is the highest license, which has most of the security features, because Azure Active Directory is also a security service. It provides a couple of security capabilities which are available with Premium P2. Typically, organizations uses a combination of licenses. They typically use Premium P1 and P2. So all their administrators and super users are like administrators, super administrators who have majority of the access to the environment. They basically assign Premium P2 licenses to those people to manage, because they have access to most of the applications and resources. So their account needs to be secured with utmost priority. So they basically allocate premium P2 to all their super users, VIP users, or their leadership people. And premium P1 is typically assigned to uh, the operations team members. So that's how they do the differentiation. So these licenses for Active Directory are assigned as user level. So when you purchase a license, you need to provide the quantity. Okay, I need 20 premium P1 license, I need 30 premium P2 licenses, and then you can assign licenses to the users. That's what you do. So if you go to, this is your Azure Active Directory view. If you go to licenses here under overview page, if you go to licenses, here you see the licenses here. So you click on all products and here you see all the products. Right now you don't have any license. You can either try or buy. So you can click on try buy, then you can purchase licenses here. So you have E5 license, you have premium P2 license, you can purchase it from here. Azure Active Directory also gives you 30 days of trial for E5 as well as premium P1 and P2 licenses. Okay, let's go back to the slide deck. So these are on the additions and licensing part. Let's move on. Then comes the use cases that why should we use Azure Active Directory and what are the benefits of it? So I've already told you that Azure Active Directory is the single most authentication and authorization system for Azure services. For example, we actually authenticate to Azure Active Directory when we log into Azure portal, when we log into M365, when we log into any Microsoft online services. We can also use Azure Active Directory to authenticate to external identities as well. So in the next slide, I'm saying, in a couple of moments from now, I will have your users added to my Active Directory and you will be able to authenticate. And you are using Gmail, you're using, other, domains, external identities. Some of you are using Gmail, Yahoo, Rediff, MSN.com identities, but I will still be able to authenticate you. So you can actually register applications with Azure Active Directory for the authentication. You can use you can also authenticate to external identities, and you can also authenticate to cloud applications as well as on-premises Active Directory. Now this Azure AD Connect is a small utility or a small software. What it does, you basically deploy it on, you basically deploy it either in a virtual machine in Azure or on your on-premises domain controller, and it basically asks you for credentials. You provide credentials for both your on-premises domain controller, which is the enterprise admin, and the credentials of Azure admin. And then what it does, it copies or synchronizes all the on-premises Active Directory users and groups and computers and all the resources to Azure Active Directory. Now, how it helps? For example, once again, you have 1,000 users here at on-premises. You're moving your applications to Azure. Now those users needs to log into Azure portal and access application. So instead of creating those users in Azure separately, the way you have done it on-premises, you can use Azure AD Connect to synchronize on-premises identities with Azure AD, and all your users will be created in Azure by default. And then you can assign them access to various Azure services. That's the purpose of AD Connect. So these are the use cases for Azure Active Directory. Now, if you have this doubt in mind that if Azure Active Directory is similar to on-premises Active Directory, then why are we using on-premises Active Directory? Or why are we not using Azure Active Directory only? We use both of them. Azure Active Directory is not a replacement for on-premises Active Directory. It's just a capability through which you can manage administration. So we use both versions still today. Organizations continues to use on-premises Active Directory so that they can do the authentication to their on-premises users. And whenever there are Azure services, they will use Azure Active Directory for the authentication. So Azure Active Directory is not a replacement of on-premises Active Directory. Also, Imagine if you say that you are cloud-born organization, which means that you have recently started your business and you don't have an on-premises presence at all. You don't have a data center, you don't have an on-premises infrastructure. You have actually provisioned all your applications in Azure, all your business applications, and you have assigned laptops to all the employees and who are sitting at home, and they can directly connect to your Azure applications from home by typing portal.azure.com and signing into those applications. Now, in this scenario, you may say that I don't need an on-premises Active Directory because I don't have presence. Even though, yes, you can use Azure Active Directory, but Azure Active Directory has some shortcomings, limitations. It's not a full-fledged directory service. It's a it's an extension, or you will say that it's a high level directory service which does not have all the capabilities that an on-premises Active Directory can provide. So to summarize, Azure Active Directory is not a replacement for on-premises Active Directory. You would still need on-premises Active Directory if you have users, if you have on-premises deployments. But if you are a cloud-born organization, you may not need on-premises Active Directory at all. You will create all the users in cloud. You will have all the applications deployed in Azure, and you can directly authenticate to those applications for your users. Now, these are the terminologies for Active Directories. These terminologies are for on-premises Active Directory, that you have a domain. Domain is also common to Azure Active Directory as well. Then you have an Active Directory domain, domain controller, the server which is running the Active Directory services, which basically authenticates and authorizes access to resources. You have a domain controller, AD. Just quickly give it a read and let me know if you have any questions on this.